Hey everybody, Dahaka here. I've already made a video showing some of the issues I had with Doom's current aiming, but this is going to be a request for options. The actual mechanics for Doom's controller aiming are pretty good, or well, really good, because for example, things like the game uses circular dead zones, which is great, a circular outer threshold, or acceleration threshold. It has its acceleration starts out very slow and builds up smoothly before it caps. And the acceleration seems to be consistent on every angle, so that's great. And even though I'm completely opposed to restricting diagonal movement, for those that don't know, if you're in any of these kind of bluish regions, you can only see cardinal movement. So even though I'm wobbling the stick, I'm moving perfectly left. This is really obvious when looking straight up and down. It isn't until you break through this threshold where you start seeing diagonal movement being possible. So while I'm opposed to it doing that, you don't actually lose any angles with this. It's just rescaled to the screen region. So all these things are really set up well. We just need options to control them. So if we look at our current options, we only have horizontal and vertical sensitivity, which it's good to have both. id Software games have been great about adding these for basically ever. Look smoothing was a huge issue in the beta, but enough complaints seems to have prompted them to add it on release, so that's no longer a problem. If you want it, you can use it. If you don't, you can disable it. But everything else could really use options. So looking at the dead zone, Doom's dead zone's about 15%, give or take. And even though that's pretty small compared to most games, where most games hover around 20 to 25%, it's still a large dead zone size. You can see just how much movement I can make with my stick without any in-game cursor movement occurring. So having a slider would allow us to either completely remove it, set it to 3%, set it to 5%, 10%, really anything anybody wants. And that would really help in making precise adjustments, because moving your stick 15 or so percent to make pixel adjustments feels kind of clunky. And just in general, being able to set a lower dead zone would make aiming feel a lot more fluid. The other big one would be these missing diagonal regions. So being able to close these up would really help, so we could have full diagonal movement. Because right now, even though I understand that these are here to kind of help you not kind of screw up an angle that you may want to stay on, the issue with them is they're angular dead space, and to make subtle diagonal movements you actually have to make a pretty noticeable diagonal motion with your stick to see the most subtle diagonal movement in game, which isn't very intuitive. So having a slider would allow us to, 1, keep it at default, 2, remove it, and 3, just choose any value in between. Like someone might want to restrict their diagonal movement, but only half as much as what's currently on offer. So that'd be a great option, and kind of would be necessary to get full diagonal movement. The other two main options are very uncommon, but greatly impact aiming. So the first would be control over the acceleration curve. So as you can see, it starts out very slow and then slowly builds up until it hits its cap. So control over this. I'm not sure what curve Doom actually uses, but if it was a power function, giving us the degree would give us immense control over that. So we could choose a linear curve if we preferred, quadratic, or cubic, or anything in between. Doom might not use power functions, but having any control over this would be great. The other one would be this edge acceleration. It's a little more obvious when I press diagonal like that. When you pass this threshold, you can kind of see it jump in acceleration. So being able to control that jump or multiplier would allow us to disable it for one, to avoid any kind of this kind of ramp up time that we don't have any direct control over, or two, to increase it. So maybe someone wants to play it with a low sensitivity but still have a high turning output. These together would really, these would work well really together. So someone who perhaps likes to play at a lower sensitivity might prefer a linear curve because whatever the curve currently is might be overly precise, but still want to turn fast so they could set up a high multiplier. So this is the end of this part of the video. Hopefully the recording's reasonably smooth. Hopefully it showed everything pretty well. The next part of the video is just going to show what the default options are as well as their default values, and an interactive graph that shows what these values would change visually. So it would look like what you see in the bottom right hand corner currently, just changing to illustrate what I'm talking about. Alright, so these are what our default options look like. So we have horizontal sensitivity, vertical sensitivity, and look smoothing at their default values. This is what a crude edit of what they might look like, these requested options might look like if they were added. So we have deadzone size, angular restriction, acceleration threshold, acceleration degree, acceleration multiplier, and the defaults that I've estimated they would be at. These first three are pretty correct, or approximately correct. So I'll have the dot graph below to show that. These acceleration options, however, are just estimates of what I think Dooms might be. These could be completely off. I'm not even sure if Doom uses a power function as an acceleration curve, but these are defaults I've selected. But moving on to the visual graph, here's what the default basically looks like. You saw the beginning part of this video. Having a deadzone slider would allow us to change the deadzone size, and I've set a range for this of 0 to disable it completely, up to 20, which is a little bigger, but in case players find themselves drifting at the default size, they can increase it. So having this would let you set it to any way you want, so you'd only have to move your stick just outside this area before you start seeing acceleration. Same exact thing for this acceleration threshold or outer dead zone. 80% is really low, but so you'd move your stick past here, your acceleration would cap, and then the multiplier would take over. You could have, of course, the default 95, or you could put it to 1, so you have to push your stick fully before you start seeing this the acceleration cap or the multiplier take over. This is the acceleration degree following a power function. So again, I don't know if this default is what Dooms is or if it uses a power function, but you can kind of see the graph on the lower right corner. See how it changes based on this value. So we have a linear curve. So if you move your stick to this position, this is how much acceleration you'd get out. And if you wanted a really precise curve, there's a cubic, and you can see the pretty insane difference. This would give players immense amounts of control over how they want their acceleration to work. The acceleration multiplier, again, could be off, but I have the same range. 1 would functionally disable it, so even though if you pass this acceleration threshold, you wouldn't see any more acceleration, it would cap. Or you can see it multiply or build up to a multiplier. This, of course, could be used together. So, as I mentioned in the beginning part, like someone who likes slow sensitivities could use a more linear curve, which would be more intuitive to them. So, like a slow sensitivity might be, let's just say, 100 degrees per second. That's pretty slow. But you have so you move your stick over here, that's 100 degrees per second. But have a ×3 multiplier, so when they pass the threshold, they can go up to a 300 degrees per second speed. So you can still have a relatively low sensitivity and a fast one. Or you could disable it, play with a high sensitivity, and use your acceleration curve to give you precision. The last option is the diagonal range. This would go from 0 to 20 degrees. This range is a little off just because it's the value to make the graph. But this is basically bounding off 20 degrees per quadrant. So you see like 70 degrees, this is about 70 degrees right here. And having a slider to control this would allow us to completely disable it, use the default, or any mix in between. Now, of these options, the most important is this option, this restricted diagonal range, and the dead zone, because being able to get full diagonal movement and customize your dead zone is sort of like a base level idealized like controller support. But having these acceleration options would really put Doom uncontested to the top of console controller aiming quality and even controller support on PC games. No game would really come close. Like Doom has great core mechanics, and with the options, it would be one of the most responsive feeling games just because you can customize everything to your liking. And id Software, if you're listening to this, these options also have pretty big effect on accuracy. If, for example, just even alone being able to customize the dead zone would make weapons like the Vortex Rifle, the Lightning Gun, or the Hellshot, those kind of weapons, much easier. I mean, all weapons in general, really, to use, especially in tandem with this acceleration, since you can get a more precise curve, so you can make precise movements more easily, or if you have low sensitivity, maybe this is more of an intuitive curve. So, I mean, most of these options are ones I've requested since the beta, but it would be good to see hopefully all of these, but especially the dead zone and the restricted diagonal range added before support completely drops for the game. So this about covers all my requested options, and hopefully I've explained myself well enough and why I think some of these options should be added. If you want to see these graphs, images, and this interactive graph, I'll put these all in the description for you to mess around with. And I've also set up things myself, set up an aiming system that shows you differences in power functions, such as linear, a quadratic, and a cubic, so you can actually see these applied in game, as well as restricting diagonal range in this same exact fashion, except mine's from 0 to 25 degrees or 22 degrees, which is more than Doom's, and 45 degrees. But it'll give you a good estimate on what the aiming would look like. So that about covers this video. So hopefully this will make it to id Software's eyes so they can think it over. Hopefully we'll see these options at some point. But thanks for watching, and hopefully y'all have a good rest of your day.